Hi everybody, Roy here from Apotheca Marketing. Today we're going to take a look at some of the differences between Google Universal Analytics, which is probably what you're used to and using today, and Google's new platform, Google Analytics 4 or GA4. Now, Google recently announced that it was going to be sunsetting Universal Analytics, and they are not giving you a lot of time. So as of July 1st, 2023, Google Universal Analytics, your current measurement system probably, is not going to be collecting data any longer. So if you want to have year-over-year data, it's important for you to implement GA4 as soon as possible so that you at least have some comparable data year over year. Ideally, July 1st would have been a great time to do it, but if you haven't yet, it's still not too late and is relatively easy to implement as far as just baseline reporting. If you do have e-commerce, it is a bit more challenging, and we'll talk about some of those challenges as we dive in. So one of the things that people are a bit surprised and maybe chagrined about is that there is no actual migration from Universal Analytics to GA4. They are essentially different reporting systems. They have different reports, they have different metrics, they have different data definitions. So taking your historical data from Universal Analytics and just migrating it to the new version, like you were able to in previous versions of Google Analytics, is not going to be possible in the current one. And again, it is because of those different data definitions. It's also because Universal Analytics was web-oriented, whereas Google Analytics 4, GA4, is web stream-oriented. So in other words, you can have a web stream, you can have an app stream, you can have other sources of data that you either report on separately or integrate into one cohesive view of your company's data. Because of that, like I said, there is no migration. So one of the things that you're going to need to do is get used to this new reporting, understand the differences, understand the definitions and how they're different, and how that's going to impact your reporting. Now, one of the things you can do with Universal Analytics is export the historic data and keep that. And whether that's in big data, Google's big data product, or offline in some other third-party reporting, you'll be able to have that historic data so you can have a view of your data, but it is not going to be apples to apples with GA4, and we'll talk about some of those differences as we dive in. If you're just joining us, again, this is Roy from Apotheca Marketing, and we'd love if you could subscribe or like, and we'll be doing more of these videos going forward. All right, let's dig into some of the differences in the reporting that we're going to be seeing in Google Analytics 4 versus Universal Analytics. So one of the things we're looking at right here is a couple demo accounts that Google has very generously set up, which will help illustrate some of the differences between the two platforms. So as you can see here, we're looking at UA. Now, one of the main differences that you're going to find in the reporting is Google in GA4 is attempting to tie together disparate use cases of across platforms and across devices. So previously, if somebody logged into your site or was visiting your site on their phone, went home or went to the office and was looking at your site on their desktop or laptop, those were going to be two different sessions, two different users. It looks like two different people. Well, Google's actually tying that together in GA4 so that theoretically you'll have a better view of how people are using your products, whether it's an app or whether it's your website, across devices. That will potentially lower some of your user traffic when you start using GA4. So you may see, if you have a lot of people that use multiple devices to visit your site, if they're coming back repeatedly using their phone versus their desktop, some of those numbers might be lower. The other big thing that's going to be different in GA4 is it doesn't have views like Universal Analytics. And what I mean by that is, as you can see, there's a view here of the data. And if you go into your Universal Analytics interface, you'll see that you can set up different views based on different filters in your data. So the most common way that people have used this historically is to exclude employee traffic, to exclude test or development traffic. So if they're wanting to test tagging on a new version of the site or new pages or a new section of the site or something like that, or just a different implementation of your analytics, you can test that without soiling or impacting your live data. And so you could set up a raw data view or test data view, or exclude one that excludes employees. You cannot do that in GA4, although you can still exclude employees. There still is a filter for excluding certain IP addresses, but you can't set up, the different views of tests and that type of thing. So that is one major difference. It may or may not impact you or how you do your work. One of the differences you're going to find in the reporting is the difference in pre-built reports. So Universal Analytics had an abundance of pre-built reports, and whether that's around acquisition data, around audience and behavior, a lot of this is broken out for you so you can very easily drill down and get to data very, very quickly. That is not the case in GA4. GA4 does not have nearly the same amount of pre-built reports. And so you'll see this in the reporting options here. If you go to reports, you do have high-level metrics about users, revenue if you're a retail or e-commerce store, event counts. And one of the things you will see is that GA4 is event-based reporting. So many of them are baked in. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. So you do have some more events than you had previously. You can still set up custom events, but it is slightly different. But if you look at the acquisition report here, you can see that you have user acquisition, but it doesn't drill down into the different reports that you had in Universal Analytics. So you have high-level metrics around engaged sessions, revenue, that type of thing. But if you notice in the acquisition area of Universal Analytics, you're very easily able to go into source and medium, pull up your Search Console data, look at social or various campaigns, and that is not necessarily the case in GA4. You do have engagement metrics, which shows how people are using the site. You can actually look at pages and screens that people are using on the site, and see, the most common pages, the views, that type of thing. But essentially, the reporting is really more dependent on the explore function. And this explore function, if you've used other third-party reporting tools, you may be familiar with this concept, but they do have some freeform and built-in funnel exploration, that type of thing. But essentially, the GA4 is more dependent on you building your reports that you may need rather than offering them as pre-built reports. Again, this is not necessarily something that the average business user is going to feel comfortable doing or want to do. If you're an analyst at your company or a marketing person, you're not going to want to just lob a login over to your average business user or executive and expect them to build out these reports. So one of the things that we're recommending for people is to really take a look at building these out in Data Studio, Google Data Studio, which is a free reporting tool. And you can then build out some of those similar custom reports that you have in Google Universal Analytics and have your executive team or your business users use that rather than trying to flesh out these reports within GA4. All right, let's take a look at some of the differences in the data and how it's defined and how it's reported on in GA4 compared to Universal Analytics. So one of the things that you'll notice is one of the most common traffic metrics is users, and that is defined slightly differently in GA4 compared to Universal Analytics. So Universal Analytics had only two types of users. You had total users and you had new users. In GA4, you have total users, active users, and new users. And so it's defining those slightly differently. It's going to be where the real difference comes in is that in GA4, some of the reports will by default use active users, people who've been active on the site in the last 28 days, whereas UA will use total users within a period of time. So it's slightly different metric. Again, you may see differences in your reporting if you're doing year-over-year comparisons. Another that is different is sessions. And so if you're looking at sessions, there will be a slight difference in how it's defined, and that is that they both time out after 30 minutes of inactivity. So if somebody comes to your site, they're not doing anything, they're not scrolling, they're not interacting with the site for 30 minutes, it will end the session. The difference is that in Universal Analytics, it would also end the session at midnight. So if somebody is on your site and using it, but crosses the border between midnight, it would automatically end that session so that you would have that for the previous day. So it would essentially be double counting a user that might be using the session around midnight. That, obviously, if you have worldwide traffic or if you have a lot of people in different time zones, could lead to inaccurate session reporting. GA4 is attempting to kind of account for that and not double count those users just because they're using it around midnight. Another thing that is a bit of a difference is that in GA4, there is now no longer the concept of bounce rate. And so in Universal Analytics, bounce rate was often used in reporting to look at, whether a page was relevant, whether people were engaging with your content. And how it was defined was essentially that if somebody came to your site, landed on a page, and didn't interact with another page, and then left the site or were inactive, that they bounced. And so it looked at a percentage of people that were bouncing from your site. So you can see here, if you look at your typical acquisition report in Universal Analytics, one of the main metrics is bounce rate. And so that would show you how many people were actually coming and then immediately leaving. Now that is different in GA4 because they've taken into account that many websites don't actually use multiple pages. And so somebody may be scrolling and engaging with a lot of content on your site, but not actually clicking to another page. And so GA4 uses instead the metric of engagement. And so they're looking at the percentage of users that have sessions longer than 10 seconds, that have converted on the site, or have looked at least 2 pages, or views. So they may have looked at different views on the site because they don't necessarily use the term page. And so that bounce rate is going away. The other, one of the other big changes is around conversion. And the most egregious, I think, in this, or one of the biggest changes that people will not be used to, is if you look at your main metrics for e-commerce. So if you look at conversions, for instance, in e-commerce, in Universal Analytics, one of your main reporting areas is conversion rate. That does not exist in GA4. They show conversions, they show transactions, orders, revenue, but it does not calculate your conversion rate. So if you do want to report on conversion rate, you're going to need to do that offline. And either in Excel or in Data Studio, you can use a calculated metric in Data Studio to report on that. But again, that's something that I'm not quite sure why they do that, but it is a bit annoying if that is a metric that you regularly look for in your standard reporting. Again, if we go to acquisition, you can see that They have engagement metrics, they have revenue, but again, there is no conversion rate per se. They'll have the number of conversions, but not conversion rate. Aside from conversion rate, one of the things you're going to notice that is significantly different in GA4 is that it's event-based. And so you define your events. There is also predefined events. And those events can all be registered as a conversion if you like. So for instance, you can see here, there's things like view promotion or page views, user engagement, scrolling. Again, there's numerous out-of-the-box events within GA4. They are sometimes named differently than Universal Analytics. So if you're involved with the tagging of your site, you're going to need to know those terms that are different. But these events can be made into conversions. You're not seeing that here because I don't have permission in the demo account, but normally there is a toggle here that you can define these as a conversion. One of the other things that is a bit different in Google GA4 compared to Universal Analytics is Universal Analytics, the conversions were goal-based. And so if you have a normal non-commerce site and you want, for instance, a conversion that is a form being filled out, you would create that goal, which then would be categorized and made into a conversion. So there's no categorization of events in GA4, and so that's something that's going to be a bit different for you to learn and understand and involve in your metrics. So another significant difference in GA4 that is a bit onerous, especially if you are a commerce site, is that e-commerce tracking is not as out of the box as it was in Universal Analytics. So if you're familiar with Universal Analytics, if you have a retail site, you could often click a toggle that says you want to do e-commerce tracking, and it would essentially automatically track your main conversion points like revenue and that type of thing. That is not the case with GA4. It's much more dependent on Google Tag Manager and on data layers to capture that information on the site and then pass that to the tool. And if you're not familiar with data layers, we will be doing a video about that in the near future, but essentially it is a script on your site that captures things like product information, revenue, actions on the site, and then passes that to the tool. If you don't have that data layer, and if you aren't using Google Tag Manager, you're going to have some problems setting this up, especially on platforms like Shopify, which don't allow you to access some of the shopping cart process and the checkout process. It's a bit of a black box. So some of those steps in the process are not going to be available to you. There is some script, which we will actually link to in the video as well, that will allow you to capture some of that checkout information and pass it to GA4 from Shopify. But in general, if you are running a commerce site, it is a bit more effort to tag GA4. Now, if you already do have a data layer for your existing Universal Analytics, you can use much of that for GA4. So you can use some of those existing triggers, existing data collection points, and just use them in GA4. Now, there are some definitions that may change. You may have to develop some data layer variables. But again, it is a more time-consuming process than Universal Analytics, but it's something that we can help you with for sure if you have questions around that. The other thing that is it's a little bit different too is page views in GA4. It's similar, except that GA4 doesn't have the concept of unique page views. So that is a bit different. They just have page views. So again, it's one of the reasons why your metrics aren't necessarily going to match up between the two systems. Admittedly, GA4 reporting is going to be a bit of a challenge for you. We do encourage you to spend some time exploring the reporting, understanding its differences, and really getting familiar with Data Studio and beginning to build out some of the reporting for Data Studio. Now, interestingly, not all the metrics in Data Studio in GA4 are available in Data Studio. So much like other aspects of GA4, it's not quite ready for prime time. So we don't recommend necessarily, as of right now, switching over all of your reporting to GA4 and doing away with Universal Analytics. It's definitely going to be a transitional process for you and your company, but now is the time to start doing that. Now is the time to start becoming familiar with it. Time to start building out reporting so that it's not a shock when end of life comes in 2023. So again, if you like this video, go ahead and subscribe and like, and feel free to reach out if you have questions, and leave those questions in the comments below. Thanks.